Today is exactly 2 months since the Doklam standoff began unfolding. Neither Beijing nor New Delhi is ready to budge. But a day after fracas erupted on Pangong Tso in Leh, the army officers from both sides agreed to meet. On Gravitas, we take a look at the developing situation and talk about where it's headed. Good evening, you're watching Gravitas. I'm Sana Khan. The headlines first. The US Treasury Department sanctions Pakistan-based terror group Hizbul Mujahideen as a counter-designated group, freezing any assets it may hold in the United States and prohibiting Americans from any dealings with it. Pakistan Election Commission clears candidate of global terrorist Hafiz Saeed's party to contest the parliamentary elections. Will the world leaders now hold Pakistan accountable? Indian and Chinese army officials hold a flag meeting in Chushul area of Ladakh a day after Indian border guards foiled an attempt by Chinese soldiers to enter Indian territory along the banks of the Pangong Lake. Indian government starts a review of the massive import of electronics and information technology products from China due to concerns over security and data leakages. Indian Americans miffed as Donald Trump goes back to placing the blame on both sides in Virginia violence. While his comments are disgrace, even as Trump faces heat from within his own party over Charlottesville. And a wave of anti-tourist protests spread across southern Europe amid an angry backlash by residents. They say unchecked tourism at some of the continent's most popular destinations has led to overcrowding, rising rents and pollution. WION takes a closer look. And later on the show, the government has started a review of the massive import of electronics and information technology products from China due to concerns over security and data leakages. We take you to Iran, a country that was at the forefront of the fight against the Islamic State. It's now facing the heat. It faces terrorist threat at home. And the Indian American community in Virginia and elsewhere in America is concerned. We get you the mood on the ground after the US president's latest statement on Charlottesville violence. And if you're planning for a European holiday, well, think again. Europe has revolted. Anti-tourist protests are spreading all across south of Europe. We talk more about this. And heart-wrenching scenes from Sierra Leone. The country is struggling to come to terms with the latest crisis to have hit the African nation. But the big story first. The US Treasury Department has designated Hizbul Mujahideen as a foreign terrorist organization. This designation will deny resources to Hizbul Mujahideen to carry out terror attacks and also ban US persons from engaging in any talks or transactions with the group. Hizbul Mujahideen was formed in 1989 and it's one of the largest and oldest militant groups operating in Kashmir. It is led by Sayyid Salahuddin, who in fact has already been designated as a global terrorist by the United States. The group has claimed responsibility for some major attacks, including the one in April of 2014, explosive attacks in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, where 17 people were hurt. This action notifies the US public and the international community that this group, the Hizbul Mujahideen, is a terrorist organization which isolates this organization, individuals, and also denies them access to the US financial system. This is also significant as this development comes just a day after US President Donald Trump spoke to the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi over the telephone. All right, defense analyst Qamar Cheema, he joins me live from Pakistan, and WION's Pakistan Bureau Chief Taha Siddiqui is also live with us. Joining me from the newsroom here is WION senior editor Surya Gangadharan. Qamar Cheema, let me come to you in just a bit, but Taha, first up with you, what's happening in Pakistan? There are rallies, Hafiz Saeed is taking part in politics in Pakistan. At the same time, you have this step coming in from the US. Does it all really mean anything?
Well, if you remember last time, Sana, when basically just 2 months ago, when Hizbul Mujahideen's chief, Sayyid Salahuddin, was designated as a global terrorist by the United States, following that, the Pakistani Foreign Office had said that it regrets this decision of the United States because in its eyes, the chief of Hizbul Mujahideen, Sayyid Salahuddin, is a freedom fighter. According to the Pakistani state's narrative, he is sort of fighting for the self-determination, and they regretted the fact that the United States is calling that self-determination as terrorism. So the Pakistani stance and the Pakistani government stance continues to be the same, that people who are involved in this sort of rebellion in Kashmir against the state, against the government there, and many of them are based in Pakistan. They're allowed to cooperate freely in Pakistan because of the very fact that Pakistan considers them as friendly towards the country and not involved in any militant activity within the country. Now here, just the very fact that now we've seen that even Jamaat Dawa has become a political party, and it's coming out with its own political mandate, and it's participating in elections very soon in September in NA 120 against the Prime Minister's wife, the former Prime Minister.
All right, Taha, thanks so much for those inputs. Surya, coming to you, what does this all mean? Is it reading too much into it? Because Narendra Modi just had a word with the US President Donald Trump. Do you think it's part of some deal that has happened? How do you look at this latest development?
You are very different from past actions that the US has taken against other groups, including the Lashkar-e-Taiba. In fact, I would describe it as a slap on the wrist, a slap on the Pakistani wrist. The fact remains that the US is signaling a certain intention. Whether it is actually prepared to carry that out and implement it is a different matter. And if you look at the kind of relationship that exists between the Pakistani military and intelligence establishment with that of the US, it goes back several decades, and I don't think that cooperation is going to be effective. These two, in a sense, feed off each other, cooperate with each other, have deep stakes in each other. So I don't believe this new proscription by the US is really going to affect that kind of cooperation or have, for that matter, any impact on the movement and activities of this group.
All right, Qamar Cheema, I want you to come in at this point. Surya says it's a slap on the wrist, but if it's just that, then Pakistan, the US is letting it off too easy. We've heard about the sanctions, cutting off, financial aid, but, nothing really affects Pakistan, it seems. Or how do you see this, what's happening in Pakistan?
Well, I think Pakistan is moving ahead, and what we see is that the Pakistan state narrative is so strong that the organization like Hafiz Saeed, they have to join politics and they have to shun that extremist politics which they were trying to have that. So we believe the state is strong. One thing you need to know and your audience needs to know. But what is coming from Washington, D.C., what we believe is that I think until the time the Americans do not understand that how Kashmiris are in trouble, they cannot understand what kind of a movement if it is going on in India, and the people who are supporting that movement, those who are coming from the very indigenous grounds from Kashmir, they cannot understand that. And that is why Pakistan is saying that whatever the Americans are doing, that is not feasible, that must not be. And I think this is the special pressure of India.
But why not? Why not? What has Pakistan done to receive any sort of concessions? I mean, Pakistan is still, the world community is letting it go, but perhaps not too long.
Well, I think the work that Pakistan has done for eradicating extremism and mainstreaming in parties like Hafiz Saeed, I think if Hafiz Saeed is being mainstreamed, that is the winning of the state narrative that they have to come into the institutions. So they are shunning
Well,
that kind of politics.
He shouldn't be allowed to even, campaign, let alone contest an election. There are charges, Mr. Qamar Cheema, against this man that you're talking about.
Well, the charges are there, but unfortunately, they has not been proved by the courts. The courts have not realized how. But one thing is very clear: till the time there is no proper evidence, you cannot just put Hafiz Saeed behind bars. Although we consider that Hafiz Saeed has not done favor to Pakistan on many occasions, and Hafiz Saeed is a liability to Pakistan.
Right.
I cannot defend Hafiz Saeed for whatever he has done.
Right, I got your point, Mr. Qamar Cheema. I got your point. Just hold on to that thought. Taha, very quickly coming back to you. Now, these sanctions against Hizbul Mujahideen, we've seen this before where these terrorist organizations re-emerge again. They use a different name, different nomenclature. So what difference does it make? That's the bottom line. That's the big question. Will it?
Well, definitely, as you've said yourself, we've seen from the 90s when Lashkar-e-Taiba was the name of Jamaat al-Dawa, then the same people launched Jamaat al-Dawa after Lashkar-e-Taiba was banned by Musharraf. Then Jamaat al-Dawa came under trouble, and then it was renamed.
All right, and Surya, what do you have to say? I think we lost Taha over there. Closing comments.
Well, I don't think anything much is going to change as far as this group is concerned, or for the matter, the movement and activities of so many other groups in Pakistan. The US is yet to demonstrate that kind of resolve to go after these groups. And unfortunately, India lacks the capability and the perhaps the vision, perhaps the will to go after these groups on its own. So in that sense, we are caught in a kind of, it's a cul-de-sac. We are stuck with this neighbor, we are stuck with these groups, and we only get these symbolic interventions by the US, which frankly at the end of the day may really amount to nothing.
All right, we leave it at that. Surya Gangadharan, Taha Siddiqui and Mr. Qamar Cheema, thanks all of you for joining me on the show this evening. And the other big story, 7 weeks into the standoff on Doklam, and India and China now appear to be finally talking at the tactical level, but not about Doklam. Sources say there was a flag meeting at Trishul in southeast Ladakh between senior Indian and Chinese military officers. The meeting was at the level of brigadier. Sources say the meeting was about Tuesday's incident on the Pangong-So Lake just north of Trishul. In fact, sources say the meeting was pre-scheduled, but it appears that the main item on the agenda was the Chinese incursion into the Indian side of the Pangong-So Lake. Both sides, sources say, have committed to maintaining peace and tranquility. Reports say Chinese troops entered the Indian bank of the lake, claiming it as their own. The sources say they were armed with iron rods. Both sides threw stones at each other before the Chinese withdrew. And importantly, this is the first incident of its kind between the two sides. The Chinese Foreign Ministry expressed ignorance of the incident.
你说的具体情况我不了解，但是我可以告诉你的是，中国的边防部队一直在致力于维护中印边境地区的和平与安宁，而且呢，我们一直在实控线中方一侧巡逻和执行。我们敦促印方恪守两国间达成的有关协议、协定和规定，切实地遵守1959年实控线，切实地维护两国边境地区的和平与稳定。
But it may have added a disturbing new element to the 2-month-long standoff on the Doklam Plateau in Bhutan in the east, where around 300 Indian and Chinese troops are camped within a few hundred meters of each other. China claims the territory as its own. India says the territory is disputed between Bhutan and China, and it has come to Bhutan's aid at its request. All right, Ainar Tanjin joins me live from Beijing. He's a political and economical commentator on economics and politics, rather. Ainar, thanks so much for joining me here. How do you read these developments as they unfold? I mean, Doklam still continues. Then you have this incursion in Ladakh, and an incident first of its kind. You have, armies, some of them armed with iron rods, some throwing stones at each other.
Well, thank goodness it was only stones or alleged iron rods. I think the main point to take away from this is that an Indian officer reported, security officer, that it appears a group had lost its way. Now, if you think of the enormity of the border did, and that there was a confusion and an altercation occurred. Obviously, tensions on both sides, especially among troops, must be at a very, very high level. So at this point, I think it would be foolish to jump to any conclusion that this was some sort of deliberate act trying to provoke to provoke India. I think it should be more put down to the fact that both sides are trying to de-escalate this situation.
But do you believe when the Chinese side say they had no idea about what had happened at Pangong Tso? Do you believe that hours after the incident was reported?
Well, let's put it this way. There is a long tradition here that you do not want to report bad news if, in fact, that army patrol was responsible for crossing over and creating an incident. This is not something that their commanders would want to necessarily report to Beijing, that during a heightened time that they had somehow made a mistake.
Okay.
In China, you make a mistake and you can be dismissed. It can end your career.
All right. I think you said it over there. Professor Swaran Singh, he's a professor at the School of International Studies at the Jawaharlal Nehru University. He's also joining me live from New Delhi. Professor Swaran Singh, do you see anything unusual in the way India has handled the event, starting from what happened 2 months ago in Doklam and now in this latest instance of incursion?
I think very clearly there is an effort on Indian side to recalibrate, reorganize relationship on the border with China. And some of that insistence with restraint, but with firmness, is beginning to show some results. And in that sense, it's not good news that troops were clashing in the western sector as well. But if you see the response from Chinese side, it shows that they are willing to also show restraint. And I find it difficult to believe that Beijing was not aware. This was India's Independence Day. Border is kept with firmness, and not only celebrations, but also alertness is increased on Independence Day or occasions like that. And it was clearly understood that a skirmish of this nature would really flare up and will be between New Delhi and Beijing. Some clarifications will be sought. So I don't think that the Beijing was unaware of what happened on the ground, but apparently the response of insisting on China's effort to maintain peace and stability is a good response in that sense. I think India's firmness is being understood in Beijing is what we can see from this incident.
Okay, you say that message is being sent across and perhaps being received as well. In fact, let me try and go across to our guest in Hong Kong, Mr. Andrew Leong. I'm being told he'll be joining us in just a few moments. But Einar, coming back to you, internally, how is China seeing all of this?
Well, I think China, the upper echelon, that these things are handled in a way that is conducive to peaceful and ongoing relationship. I think especially as we approach the BRICS summit, the Belt and Road initiatives, and these types of events, China is very, very concerned about having things go very smoothly. You can recall when Modi visited China, there was enormous efforts made to make sure that not only security, but that every attention to detail and that every effort was made to make sure that such a visit was productive and very comfortable for Modi. So I think this is part of the Chinese way of addressing things. They're very, very concerned about detail.
Okay.
As possible.
All right, Einar. In fact, Andrew K.P. Leong, international and independent strategist, he's also joining us live from Hong Kong. Mr. Leong, thanks so much for joining me here. Let me start by asking you, what's the overview that you get? You know, you had Doklam, now you have these incursions in Ladakh, and you have senior army officer, brigadier level officers having a chat about it. I mean, what's happening on Doklam front then? No talks, nobody moving from their respective stands?
Well, I mean, the Doklam affair has been going on for a couple of months already. And in China itself, there is increasing kind of rise of nationalism, saying that, hey, you know, we can't allow this happening in our border. You know, China have always had this problem of incursions into China claimed territories and so on and so forth. But on the other hand, at this point in time, these are minor crashes by any comparison. I mean, these skirmishes have happened in the past many times along this very long border between China and India. And the long-standing disputes hasn't been resolved. But this is not a priority for China. But on the other hand, China cannot afford to be seen to be weak if, for example, India increases the extent of the incursion and is also rattling up the rhetoric, as it were. So at the moment, if both sides maintain a degree of calm and through diplomatic discussions, things could be smoothed out, and both sides can find a way to get out of this rather, if you like, meaningless conundrum. Because at the end of the day, I think China would back down in building a road, effectively, because China's building a road in its own territory, even though it seems to be threatening India's security, but that doesn't give India the right into China's claimed territory. So anyway, but I think that at the moment, all these additional incursions, and they are relatively minor by comparison.
Okay.
Let's keep them.
In fact, many angles to this story in Doklam as days progress. I'd request you all to please stay with me while we explore another angle to this. Is the Pangong Tso incident linked to the recent developments in India's ties with America? Well, sources did not discount it, although they said that China has been increasingly wary of the growing engagement between New Delhi and Washington. And Tuesday's announcement by the White House in that sense must have added to Chinese suspicions about the direction of India-US convergence. The White House, referring to a conversation between US President Donald Trump and the Indian Prime Minister, said, and I quote, "The leaders resolved to enhance peace and stability across the Indo-Pacific region by establishing a new 2x2 ministerial dialogue that will elevate their strategic consultations." Now, reading between the lines, it appears defense and security is now at the top of India-US's agenda. Analysts say it marks a shift from past US policy, which gave priority to consultations between the two foreign and commerce ministers. The new structure makes it similar to the 2+2 dialogue format between the Indian and Japanese foreign and defense secretaries. China's comment was studiedly neutral. They said, and I quote, "We hope India and US can develop relations which are conducive to regional peace and development." Just one question to each of my guests on this particular issue. I start with you, Professor Swaran Singh. How do you see this? It's evident that China is increasingly wary of how the US and India are taking their strategic ties forward at this point.
I think not only China, it has surprised several India watchers that completely unpredictable President Donald Trump has not really completely changed the relationship with India. In that sense, even if occasional, but such sentiments expressed by United States and by its friends and allies like Japan is a reflection of India very precariously, but even then able to manage that close relationship with United States and friends and allies, which of course is a sense of, is creating concern in Beijing. But when that is related to the border skirmishes would be a little stretching it. I believe that is something we need to notice. The nature and frequency of incursions on the border has changed. The middle sector has seen even air incursions, and now incursions on the western sector. You remember 1962, the same lake was also area where India had really got into difficulty there. So we need to really collaborate across the border as to what is happening. Doklam seems stable as of now, and I think nothing much to worry in that sense. It may take longer time, but it's not really flaring up anymore.
Right. Mr. Einar Tanjan, how do you look at this latest sort of, elevation in strategic partnership between Washington and New Delhi? How do you suppose China would be looking at this?
Well, quite frankly, for China, the difficulty here is they see this and the time Doklam incident as somehow connected to Modi-Trump meeting. So this has been something that's been on their mind. I don't think that Beijing is saying that India and the U.S. can't have a strategic relationship. I don't think it's an internal matter. Trade.
Einar, we can barely hear you. We can barely hear you. We'll try and fix that audio connection with you. Let me take that to Mr. Leong at this point. Mr. Leong, would you like to take on from where Einar left it off? What is happening in China vis-a-vis looking at how India and US are taking their ties forward?
Well, I think China knows very well, even from the old days, America's onto a strategy of containing China, and this containment takes place not only to pivot to Asia, which is of course is more rhetoric than action up to now, but also aligning with countries less friendly to China or balancing against China. For example, in the Asia Pacific, that includes Vietnam, it includes originally the Philippines until now, of course, includes Australia and particularly Japan. But in the Indian Ocean, China is fully aware that China's, for example, the Belt and Road extension of its influence through trade and also relationships. It seemed to be a threat to India, right. And of course, seeing that India is likely to be America in this strategy. But let's face it, I don't think that India would give up its non-allied policy that easily. Right. It's one thing to be allied to the United States. It's another to be seen to
absolutely. Our next report talks about that a bit more. A lot really is at stake. Do stay with me. I'll come back to you, Einar Tanjan, in just a bit. Now, is the Doklam standoff affecting the broader India-China relationship? That's also a significant question. Well, India's IT ministry has given smartphone companies an August 28th deadline this year. They must detail how they ensure security and protect user data. If their replies are not satisfactory, penalties will be levied. Majority of these companies are from China. The top 3 selling smartphones in India are Chinese, namely Xiaomi, Vivo and Oppo. Suspicions about malware in Chinese communication and telecom equipment is growing. Last year, India banned some Chinese smartphones that lacked security features. In 2014, the Air Force warned its personnel from using some Xiaomi-branded mobile devices. And in that very year, Chinese firm Huawei was named in a hacking incident involving Bharat Sanchar Nigam, or the telephone operator of the government in the country. Einar, if I can come to you. Now, we understand there are broader ramifications to what's happening between India and China. I'm being told Einar is, his line has been disconnected. But Professor Swaran Singh, what are the larger ramifications here?
Two large countries growing the way they are, India and China will always have suspicions about each other. But I don't think the Indian side is sort of putting that front forward. Our foreign minister has really emphasized that India is looking at building a developmental partnership with China. So these issues of irritations are of course there, but they are not going to completely derail the relationship, not from Indian side, and I don't think Chinese would either think of that. So I see it's a very large relationship with multiple colors in it. Sometimes, confrontation is much more visible than cooperation or coordination. But these are incidents which need to be really taken care of on the ground, but they are not going to derail the overall relationship between two countries. Okay. But we are not going to be fully comfortable ever with each other. We will always have issues of concerns about each other.
All right. Andrew Leong, sir, what do you have to say? I mean, do you share Professor Swaran Singh's sentiment on this, that tensions will always remain, but we can't do without each other as well because a lot is at stake?
I absolutely agree. But the reason why the two sides cannot afford to be at war, because there are a lot of common interests, and the reason why two sides would always be at odds with one another because of existing territorial disputes. For example, there's a very large state, the Arunachal Pradesh, which China claims as southern Tibet, and of course there's now Indian territory. And all these very large territorial disputes are likely to inform the side of China-Indian relationship. But as I said, there are lots of other things where the both sides can cooperate.
All right, that's all the time we have for leaving it at that. But thanks so much, Andrew K.P. Leong, Professor Swaran Singh, and Einar. Of course, his line is now disconnected, but this is one debate that will go on. We're taking a short break here on Gravitas. On the other side, we talk about Iran, a country that was at the forefront of the fight against the Islamic State. It's now facing the heat. In fact, it faces terrorist threat at home. What is it going to do? Be right back.